There's very little steady state authoritarianism, very little. The succession problem clearly indicates that, but the information problem, the governance problem, there are many different structural reasons for the decay in an authoritarian regime. We haven't talked about, but should talk about, the international environment and the ways in which it's conducive or not to authoritarianism. You know, the hand bites that feeds. If it complies with international law, they claim credit for complying with international law. And if it doesn't comply with international law, they tell you that international law doesn't apply to them in this particular case, right? And they can do really dumb things and walk away to do dumb things another day, right? That's what a big state is. Small states, they don't have those types of options, and most countries are not big states. And only one small state that I know gets away with behaving like a big state. I won't mention the name of that state, but I think you know which one I'm talking about. Okay. So, deliberate but self-defeating inefficiency, debilitating negative selection. We didn't even get to the part about rampant cronyism in the key agencies, like running the economy and running the police force. The more you study authoritarian regimes, the more you see that it's a wonder that they survive at all. Because, as I say, it's their very success that undermines them. Their very strengths threaten their own survival. Now, just the final point, I see I'm out of time. Is that accurate?
Yep.
Okay. So, on the issue, I thought I was going to talk about this more, but maybe we'll end here. On the issue of what happens when they're toast, when they go up in smoke, right? Mubarak is gone. They sack him. It took them a while. It took them a lot to get up the courage, because there had been negative selection at the top of the Egyptian military. There were a bunch of weenies up there. And even though they had no future with Mubarak, even though the whole thing was toast, it took them a while to get rid of him. It took the courage of all those people who hit the streets day after day, right? Which they then used as a pretext to sack Mubarak. And then, of course, lo and behold, that interest group, that professional agency, that professional army is looking to hold on, right? But they have incompetence, inability to rule, inability to run things, and there are still courageous people in the society, right? So the Egyptian story could go on like this for quite some time, or it could topple over like that. But if it were to topple over like that, right? If the courageous people were to hit the streets again, or if the military was just going to panic and get on a plane and flee, that's what they mostly used to do, right? Get on a plane and get out of there, like that guy in North Africa did, right? I think there was a little bit of trouble. He got on a plane and poof, that was the first one, the North African one. Remember that? The Tunisian one, I think it was? Yeah. The problem is that you need to institutionalize alternatives to the authoritarian regime. That's the trouble, right? The problem is you need a judiciary. How do you get a judiciary? That's a really hard thing to create, a judiciary. A successful, professional, semi-autonomous judiciary, right? You topple the bum, and then where do you go, like, to open the cupboard and pull out a judiciary? It's tough. You need a civil service. You think judiciary is hard. You need a civil service, right, that performs state functions without taking the money themselves. That's a really hard thing to get. And I could go on down the list of things that you need, right? You need media that are not controlled by a single person who just happens to be really rich. And when they privatize the station, you know, because the state dictator was toppled, then you get a controlled media again, but controlled in a different way, right? You have issues of institutions that need to be created that the authoritarian regime doesn't have and doesn't want to have, and that are difficult to create on the fly in a transition. And it's one of the reasons you get another incarnation, maybe dumber, maybe weaker, maybe better from an authoritarian point of view, of the previous regime. You often get mush for really long periods of time. For example, the Kyrgyzstan case that I was talking about. I mean, those guys, they don't even have a police force. It's just so pathetic, right? I mean, all that cash that came through democracy aid and their Ministry of Interior is still mush, right? You often get this mush for a while before somebody has the wherewithal to consolidate, to establish, consolidate, and maintain an authoritarian regime, which I said isn't a perverse achievement, right? So it's very difficult to get an institutionalized alternative for the reason that the authoritarian regime, while it's alive, is denying things like your judiciary or a civil service. The very key institutions you need. You don't need hope alone. You don't need votes or elections alone. There are a lot of places that have parliaments. I remember when Slobodan Milosevic was elected, for example, right? If he hadn't lost 4 wars, he'd still be there. So this is the difficult problem, is it's very hard to figure out. I guess that's why we're dependent on you to figure this out. You know, smart young people who are going to be in situations like this, how you get from an authoritarian regime being toppled, or as in most cases, toppling itself, being replaced by something better that's long-term and institutional.